So we're at Brian Pate's.
The railroad room is at the end of the corridor.
And there we are, there's the shop where all the bad stuff happens. And all the pictures and memorabilia. And we're going to enter into the railroad room shortly where we'll see the Klondike Mine and the CPR Mountain subdivision. It's the Mountain subdivision, isn't it?
Mountain and Shushwap subdivision.
Alright, there's all the accolades in hardware form. There's the gentleman himself right there. Alright, and this is where the operations occur. So on the lower level we have the CPR standard gauge, and on the top level we have the HOn3 Klondike Mines Railway. And that's Arrowhead on the standard gauge. Okay, so we'll start at the beginning. So Brian, what are we seeing now, or what will we be seeing?
The railway starts in Dawson City in the Yukon.
Okay.
And Dawson City is a heavily compressed, but I trust representative version of the original, and it includes a number of buildings which used to exist and some which still exist, and people who know Dawson can recognize them, including the church at the far end. And people always ask why that tower is there in the middle of the town, and the answer is that the tower held up a cable for a cross-river ferry, and the cable was lifted up so that it would clear the stacks of stern wheelers, rather like the Kino, which is back there.
There's the tower, and there's the Kino, and maybe we'll get another shot of it later.
And the big grey building where the Kino is docked is the White Pass dock building. The White Pass had quite a presence in Dawson City.
There's the car ferry on the cable. So it's a reaction ferry, right?
It's a reaction ferry indeed.
Okay, there's the front of the Kino.
And
there's the church.
The church was built from plans which the Reverend Tittington made available to me when they were renovating it. And I photographed the interior one Christmas when the outside temperature was like -50, which was interesting.
Wow.
So the railway started at Dawson City and then crossed the Klondike River on a rather interesting bridge. It's a truss bridge, but it's skewed. The two sides of the bridge are not opposite each other. And every spring rather, the ice from the Klondike River used to take out the footings of the bridge, so it was rebuilt a number of years.
Sounds like a government make-work project.
Indeed. And across the bridge you come to Klondike City, otherwise known as Loustown, and there the railway had its shops, and you can still find the foundations of the engine house. And what I have done is to build it as it might have looked like in 1945, after the war, and when the wartime demand for gold was at its peak. And so a number of the features there were never at the original Klondike City. The railway folded in 1913, so my version of it in 1945 is as it would have looked. And then the railway left Klondike City and headed up the Klondike River Valley.
Brian, what are all these piles of gravel that we're seeing in these nicely laid rows?
That's what a dredge lays down when it dredges for gold. The dredge movement is not continuous, it's stepwise, and that's why the tailings piles have ridges on them. And just at Bonanza Flats, they are building a dredge, and that whole operation follows a photograph. They were building dredge number 9, including the crane at the back there, and that crane still exists. It's in the back of a place called Bear Creek. At Bonanza Flats, the Bonanza Creek entered the Klondike River, and the railway continued up to the Bonanza Creek Valley, and there was a side spur that led into Bear Creek, which is where the dredge company had its shops for repairing and administering the dredge operations.
So we're going railway south now?
We are going railway south, exactly.
Alright, so there's some more tailings piles.
Yeah, this is now 90 below discovery, which is 90 claims below the discovery claim. people think that 90 below is the temperature. It isn't.
It may have been at some points.
It's a place on the creek, and here there is an operating dredge. That's one of the smaller dredges. There were 12 dredges that operated at one time in the Yukon River, not all at the same time, and that one is modelled on number 10, which when I photographed it still exists. It's now pretty much derelict.
Now, Brian, when I've had the pleasure of operating on the Klondike mines, I've occasionally had to switch out this spur.
Right.
As I recall, it offered some interesting challenges.
That's right. It's on a grade. You're delivering spare parts and empty boxcars to the dredge, and then you bring out gold, which the dredge has recovered from the gravel, and also parts that need repair. They go back down to Bear Creek. So yes, it's an interesting operation.
I'd like to draw the viewer's attention to the buckets on the continuous bucket wheel.
That's right.
I think you cast all those.
That's right. The dredge operates by digging at the front end with a bucket line, and then the gravel is processed inside, and then there's a stacker sticking out the back of the dredge which gets rid of the tailings. And then next we come to Fox Creek, which is where the dredging company had a pipeline that carried water for sluicing gold across the valley, and the dredge company has got mineral rights underneath where where the trestle is, and so the crew are having to dismantle the trestle to let the dredge go through.
So
and then
that sounds like steam blow off from the Revelstoke yard.
Actually,
well, that will be subject for another video.
Yeah. Now we come to discovery claim. This is the claim on the Bonanza Creek where gold was first discovered in the Yukon, and just south of that is the town of Grand Forks, and Grand Forks is where the railway left the Bonanza Creek Valley and headed up the hillside towards Sulphur Springs. And there is another dredge operating at Grand Forks, and I didn't get as far as building it, and I guess probably I never will.
Oh, no, don't be pessimistic. You have to have something to do.
And then the railway has now left the valley and is now climbing. It's on a 3.5% grade at this point, which is fairly steep by railroad standards. And there were a number of trestles in this area as the railway crossed creeks leading down into Bonanza Creek, and the Homestake Gulch Creek was one of these, and this was the biggest trestle on the line, and I modelled it not quite full size. And I was actually in Homestake Gulch a couple of years ago, and there's nothing left now except the footings of the trestle. And then if you continue up to Soda, Soda was a stop on the railway, and there was a road that crossed the railway at that point, so there was a little station there which was made out of a boxcar body, and that still exists. If you walk in from the road into Soda, you can still find that boxcar. It's still in halfway decent shape. And we recently found a switch stand sitting in the weeds at Soda, still in good shape. Now we're climbing up further to the end of the railway at Sulphur Springs, and at Sulphur Springs there was a Y for turning the locomotives. There were spurs. All of that still exists in traces up there if you go and look, and I was able to build a reasonable replica of the depot from plans which were drawn by a friend of mine called Bob Mitchell, who worked for Parks Canada before he retired. And that's as far as the real railway went, but in this scenario for 1945 it would have continued south to link up with the railroads further south, and to do that it goes down the Dominion Creek Valley on the far side of the hill, and so we continue on, and we come to a place called Gold Run, which actually exists, and I've got a switchback at Gold Run. The railway comes in, turns around, and then heads out south, and the rest of the railway is represented by what in model railway terms is called a helix.
So we head down that sneak off track at the back,
right,
and then disappear behind the scenery.
Yeah.
We go through this Helix. Sorry for those of you playing along at home.
The control panel is here, and as the train goes down, the red lights light up so you know where it is. And then it emerges at Sycamus. This is the town of Sycamus on the CPR.
So this is the standard gauge coming into Sycamus. And the narrow gauge meets it there, coming out of the Helix.
Right. So now we're on dual gauge trackage, which can accommodate both the standard gauge at 4 foot 8.5 inches between the rails, and narrow gauge, which was 3 feet between the rails.
And is this the Sycamus?
This is the Sycamus. The Sycamus was a real place. It is a place on the railway, and until recently, the CPR had a branch line that took off from Sycamus to go down the Okanagan Valley, and I have modelled that. So there are 3 things going on in here: the main line CPR traffic, the arriving narrow gauge traffic, and the stuff going down the Okanagan branch.
Is this a hotel we're seeing, or is this a hotel and station?
This is the hotel and depot, which existed at Sycamus until the late 1950s, and it was put there by the CPR because all of this is on Shuswap Lake, and Shuswap Lake was a place where water sports and bathing took place, and the CPR wanted to capitalize on that tourist activity.
Well, here we have the switcher.
This is a standard gauge switcher which has got flat cards on each end, which have got both the standard gauge and the dual gauge coupler. So this little switcher can handle both the narrow gauge cars and also the standard gauge cars.
And then we have the yard.
And there is the narrow gauge yard, or the Sycamus yard, and then over here is what is called an interchange yard, where they would put standard gauge and narrow gauge cars alongside each other and transfer the freight between them.
And I think this is where you'd normally find Mr. Bill Dixon resident during an
You
operating
would
session.
indeed, yes, Bill Dixon.
I don't think I've ever been here where he wasn't here.
That's right.
At that station.
That's his favourite job.
All right, so let's do the standard gauge a little bit while we're looking at stuff. So the standard gauge comes in from the east.
The line from Kamloops comes in into Sycamus from here.
And there, through that line, we have a fiddle yard, I think, right, with cassettes.
Yes, it's what is called staging, and I've adopted cassette staging, which is controversial, but I like it. And
I'm not sure why it would be controversial. It's your railroad. Anyway, there's the main line past the depot,
the station,
and then it swings along.
And you go through the engine servicing area, which there was a roundhouse needed to be built there, which didn't get built.
Another project for the future.
And there was a second hotel at Sycamus.
Is this going to be a fill, or is this going to be a low level trestle, or what's this going to be?
It's a deck, a deck girder, and there is a swing span to it. This section here will be a swing span, and that still exists, and that's how the houseboats get out of Sycamus. Sycamus is the houseboat capital of the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's follow the main line along.
Okay, this is the town of Clanwilliam, which is east of Sycamus, and there was, and still is, a passing siding there.
And then behind it we have the Helix for the narrow gauge to take it to the upper level.
The Helix is in there, that's right.
Okay.
And the standard gauge descends down a grade into Revelstoke.
I'd like to commend you on your plexiglass.
That's to stop people's elbows knocking trains off the track.
I'd rather have them lose their elbow than lose the train.
I like to avoid embarrassment for my guests. And the railroad then went across the Columbia River Valley, and there was a fairly substantial bridge was there, and that bridge still exists. And then we enter the town of Revelstoke, and there were a lot of buildings that needed to be built for this. The depot is there. The ice house is there, and the roundhouse is at this far end. And the roundhouse job is an interesting job, and Colin Dover, who's a friend of ours, has made that his specialty. He loves bringing large locomotives off and on the turntable. And the rest of the layout, the main line continues east, but now the grades have become substantial, and so one needs to put a helper locomotive on the front end of the train, and also the locomotive that runs the train is also heavier to handle the grades, and so that scene there is typical of what happened on the hill out of Revelstoke.
So that's number one?
That's whichever direction that is.
It would be east, right?
That's heading east, so it will be number one, yes.
All right. And then in front of it we have the Arrowhead Branch.
The Arrowhead Branch was a branch that ran south from Revelstoke, again to a resort area, which was at the head of the Arrow Lakes. The Arrow Lakes are a wide part of the Columbia River, and Arrowhead, as the name suggests, was at the head of the Arrow Lakes, and that was also where you could transfer from the train to one of the company's stern wheelers.
Which we'll see shortly.
So
we swing around here.
The Arrowhead Branch has got several stops on it,
And a siding.
and a passing siding at a place called Wigwam. The passing siding at a place called Sidmouth further back. And then we come to the town of Arrowhead, which is reasonably complete. I did get as far as completing Arrowhead, which had a turntable for turning locomotives. It had a fairly substantial freight house and a fairly substantial station house, and I did get as far as building the iconic stern wheeler that ran on the Arrowhead, on the Arrow Lakes. This was the Minto, which was named for an early Governor General of Canada. And in addition, there was a sawmill at Arrowhead, and I was able to use a sawmill which was given to me by the late Frank McKinney, which has a complete interior, and also the lakes in the British Columbia interior had a barge service to carry rail cars from the main line at Sycamus, the main line at Revelstoke, down to the second main line down at Castlegar and Robson, and that's what that barge is for.
That looks like the Slocum City slip.
It is.
Was it identical
it's
or
copied from the
Slocum City?
Slip, yes. And that's an interesting operation because you have to make sure you don't tip the barge, so I don't let my crews have more than one boxcar difference between the two tracks.
Which I don't believe is the same as the way the prototype was operated.
Well,
the prototype...
I once was at the CPR Tilbury dock,
yeah.
and the guys there said that they had a similar limitation. Not one car, but they had to watch out on the balance of the barge.
The Slocum, they would routinely, obviously, put the locomotives on and by themselves.
Yeah, we don't do that. We just tow the barge down to the bottom of the lake, and they have locomotives down there to unload them.
And that brings us to the end, and for completion, this is where the dispatcher sits. And also where east staging is, the line to east staging. This is where the action happens and people queue up to get their orders. Thank you for the tour, Brian.
It's my pleasure, thank you. And all of this is coming to an end shortly, since we're moving out of this house and downsizing. So,
well, thank you from all your operators for all the pleasure that the layouts brought.
Well, that's nice, because that was the whole objective.